Hello, I'm Ian Scales. You're watching TelecomTV, and I'm about to talk to Jon Bradford. Jon is the CEO of Springboard, which is a UK-based accelerator. Tell me about Springboard. What happens?
So Springboard is a 13-week accelerator program, boot camp, for want of a better expression, where we help to incubate 10 teams actually, unlucky for some. 10 teams over the period where we mix them up with smart people. They can be partners who work for large corporates, entrepreneurs who've been there and done it before, investors and angel investors, ultimately culminating in an investor day at the end of the program itself. Or that's what we used to do on Springboard.
And how long have you been running this program?
So I've been doing this for about 3 years in various different guises. Springboard is what I do as a day-to-day job, but I also help support other people to do this in other countries, including Estonia, Bulgaria, and Moscow.
And it's Springboard IoT. Why that in particular?
So I've always been fascinated by Springboard and the model. The model has been well documented and used over the last 5 or 6 years, both in the US and in Europe, but primarily aimed at mobile web type technologies. Bluntly, I'm based and live out of Cambridge, and I've been fascinated by, could one take the methodologies that we kind of adopt within Springboard for web, would they apply into hardware? Now, just coincidentally, clearly, where the world is moving towards is the cost of doing hardware has kind of dramatically fallen over the last 5 or 6 years, probably in line with what web was doing kind of 4 or 5 years ago. So can one essentially look at how Springboard evolved initially with web? Is there a natural fit for hardware? Look, the answer to the question is I spend my life trying to break things, and I might break this one as well, but I prefer to try, and I genuinely think there's a really interesting opportunity. How it's going to turn out, I don't know at this point. But I do think there is an intersection in the market, which is as the costs dramatically fall, the speed at which you can prototype kind of start to align themselves with the model, which has been primarily web.
And how does Cambridge fit in with all of this?
Cambridge has 10, 20 years worth of experience and knowledge around wireless technologies. Historically, that's been CSR, using Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. And today we're talking about Newell with the new technologies and standards that they're adopting. So there's not a shortage of those two key factors. Now, interestingly, the fact that Springboard is located both in London and also in Cambridge allows us to then leverage up the expertise which exists around web technologies. And what we're looking at with Internet of Things is actually the combination of both hardware and software, and it's the service layer that kind of sits around it, which is where it becomes interesting.
If I was a budding entrepreneur, what could I expect by joining you on Springboard?
A lot of sleepless nights. Essentially, the program is framed up with 3 key elements to it. The first part of the program is geared around trying to meet as many smart people as we practically can. Essentially, then we move on, having kind of formed all of these relationships and got feedback and contacts. The second phase is essentially what we call build, where essentially you start to work with some of those entrepreneurs that you initially met and build out the process, the model, the product itself. And finally, we wrap it up with, we call it sell, but it's essentially, can you explain, can you articulate what you're actually trying to do? And hopefully that allows you to explain yourself well in front of an audience. The audience can be angels, VCs, and in this instance, it could potentially be Kickstarter.
People have to relocate to Cambridge then. How do they cope with that?
Interestingly, actually, people who travel actually tend to do better in coping with the program than people who are physically there on the day or local. So people who are local try to do the program and try to continue everything else they've been doing before. And the program is so intense that you essentially do 2 days in one. You just all you do is live and breathe what you're trying to do. And actually, when you're in a cohort with other people, it does create a really good vibe. If you're traveling from somewhere else, for example, Montreal, you've got no social life. You don't know anybody apart from those people in the room. And so therefore, you can actually be really shameless in your need to just be selfish and actually say, all I want to do is concentrate on what I'm doing today.
You've been running the program for a number of years. What have you learned from it so far?
We used to run a model which was meet lots and lots of people and then be quiet. What we've actually created is an opportunity for teams to meet a lot of people and then be quiet, and then meet the people again, and then be quiet, and then meet the people again. So you're constantly giving them space to feedback and to digest the information that they've had. The other thing that I've discovered is most people think that these programs are geared up for 21-year-old things that have just dropped out of university and onto the new thing, the Mark Zuckerbergs of this life. What we've discovered is actually slightly older teams. I describe it as emotional intelligence. A lot of what starting a business is about relationships. How do you build them with other people? That might be investors, that might be co-workers, that might be customers. And being that little bit older actually gives you the ability, A, to digest all the information that you've been given, your ability to engage and interact with people, and also your ability to then ultimately work with potential investors or customers at the other end. So, as I say, the older generation actually fit the model better, and I think that's a real surprise to most people.
What are some of the interesting projects that you expect to see this year?
Something that looks like fuel bands for humans, but imagine that on a dog, but as a collar instead of a wrist. We have the Internet of Umbrellas. Yeah. So imagine an umbrella becoming a weather station. Yeah. So it's got a temperature thing. It's got a wind gauge. I mean, it's a little bit nuts, but who knows? It might actually work. What else? We have swimming equipment to help swimmers train. We have something in boxing. There's a lot of kind of what they call quantified self, but specific to particular sports or industries.
So what's your background, Jon? How did you come to be involved in this?
So I think I've been a geek, a gadget geek. I think this is why I actually really wanted to do hardware, because I just wanted to be sitting in a room with people playing with gadgets. I think it's a throwback from when I was 15. So essentially, I am a boring accountant. That's my sins. It sounds like an Alcoholics Anonymous mantra. Essentially, I worked for an accountancy practice for about 10 years. I jumped ship in 2000, like many others did, but I never went back. I've worked in startups. I've raised money for startups. I've been a VC and invested in startups. So I describe it as I am a tradesman of many and a master of none. And essentially, I live in a strange hinterland with Springboard, where I'm working with angels who help to invest in early stage teams. The teams potentially may or may not go on to raise funding. But I live in this world somewhere between startups and investors. And I think by luck rather than judgment, I've kind of had the right skill sets to be able to manage that 360 view on how to do some of those things.
Jon, thank you very much. Really interesting.
Oh, thank you.